Hey there, and welcome back to the last video of this series. It's finally time to jump into Substance Painter and texture this Pokeball that we've modeled and UV unwrapped in the last two videos. I will be breaking down some key texturing techniques and going over the general Substance Painter workflow. But if you want more and would like to see more in-depth Substance content, please do leave a comment and I would be more than happy to put out more beginner Substance Painter tutorials as well. So with that said, let's hit the ground running. Okay, so we've jumped into Substance Painter, and from here, I want to go to File and New. This will open up the project settings, and from here, I can go to Select and actually select the object that I want to bring into Substance, which in this case is the Pokeball. Now, keep in mind that I've already exported the Pokeball from Maya as an FBX, and before exporting it, I also subdivided it to get the mesh at its highest fidelity. We can leave the document resolution as is for now, and the normal map at OpenGL is good because we are using Arnold with Maya as a renderer, and the normal map format used for Arnold is OpenGL. If you are using another renderer, be sure to check out what the normal map format for it is, and you can switch accordingly. The last thing is we want to keep use UV tile workflow on because we did set up our Pokeball with 2 UDIMs to get more texture resolution. And then all we got to do is click OK. Now the first thing we want to do whenever we get any object into Substance Painter is bake our textures. So we're going to go up to this little croissant button and click on baking. This is going to bring us to our baking menu. And from here, all I'm going to do is switch my output size to 4K because we want to get max resolution with our bakes. And without changing any other settings, I'm going to hit Bake Selected Textures. Now while this baking, let's talk a little bit about what exactly baking is. So whenever you bring any kind of object into Substance, Substance needs to read your object and understand how it's made. So it needs to see the thickness, the position of the objects, the proximity of each objects from one another, where are the cracks and crevices. And by baking your mesh maps, you let Substance understand your model and make things easier for you in the texturing process by allowing you to use procedural maps and generators, which we'll talk about a little more in a second as well. So now that my baking is done, I can click Return to Painting Mode, and this will bring me back to my general Substance viewport. Now, the next thing I want to do is create and assign different folders or different groups to each part of the object, like one for red, one for white, one for the black, and one for the metal as well. And this is going to make it easy for me during the texturing process to separate things by material. So I'm going to click on this little paint bucket, which creates a fill layer. Now, whenever you bring in a fill layer, the fill layer is actually going to flood your complete mesh. So right down you have the properties, and for example, if I change the color, this color is being applied to my whole mesh. Another thing is working with only the attributes or the channels that you need. So if you're using color, you can alt click color and use only color. If you decide you need roughness as well, you can turn that on as well and then play with that as well. But it's always best practice to keep the ones that you're not using off. Another thing that we should talk about is the HDRI. So by shift and right click, I can move my light source. And if I go up here to my display settings and open it up, what you'll see is there's actually an environment map being channeled into my Substance viewport. So if I turn up the opacity, turn down the blur, you can see that we're right now texturing in an outdoor environment. And this is actually not the best practice because all of those greens and those yellows are actually going to affect the way you see and perceive the colors on your model. So the first thing I like to do when I come in is switch from Panorama, which is an outdoor HDRI or environment map, to something a little more black and white and a little more neutral, like a studio lighting. One of my favorites is Studio Tomoko. So I'm going to switch to that, and you can immediately see a difference in what the colors look like. So now that we've changed our environment map to something a little more neutral, let's get back to creating these folders for our materials. So if I right click on this layer, I can group the layer, and I want to add a black mask to this layer. Now if you haven't worked with masks before, when you apply a mask to something, in this case a black mask, that black color is basically making the folder override any of this red, which is why if we take a look at the material, none of that red is coming through. But if I add a paint layer to this black mask and I scroll down here to my paint properties, you'll see I have my grayscale turned on to white, which means if I paint, I'm going to be painting with white. Okay, so you can see that I'm painting with white onto my fully black mask. And now if we take another look at the material, what you'll see is that wherever there was white, it's now allowing this red color to come through. So we are going to be using masks to separate out all our objects and all our materials, because especially when you're working with a scene with a lot of them, it can get really tricky. We want to put all our objects with different materials in their own folders. But as you can see, painting is not very efficient. So what we can do is actually head up here and select the polygon fill option. What this allows us to do is usually select polygons, but to go even further, if we come down here, there is something called mesh fill. If I click on this, I can actually just click on the object and apply that mask to the whole object. So now that we've created all our different groups for all our different materials, we are finally ready to start texturing. Now, the first thing I would like to talk about is what makes things look realistic. So at a glance, something like this Pokeball reference I have up here might look just red and white, right? But if we zoom in and look at this a little closer, just like you could look at anything else around you a little closer, you will start to see a great deal of color variation and roughness variation in any object. So you can see there are some lighter reds, darker reds, there are some black spots, there are some greater mid values, even the roughness, you see a high specularity in this area compared to lesser rougher areas in other spaces as well. And all this stuff, all these little details are what make objects look realistic. So this is something that we try to implement while texturing as well. So usually I like to create my materials to be fully custom and create them layer by layer, but for the sake of today's video and to make it quick and easy to follow along, I will be using some materials from this tab right here to just speed up the process a little. So just to get a quick base and some nice color variation, I'm gonna use one of these materials here, which might give me a good starting point. And for this, I'm gonna pick this concrete material. Let's just drop this in the red shell and see what this looks like. And while you might be thinking, why am I using a concrete material to texture this Pokeball? It is because the materials that you get in Substance are very customizable, and you can pick and choose what you want from each material and actually play around with the values a lot to get something that you would like for your objects. So right here we can see our material properties. Let's go ahead and make this a dark red. Another thing is, because I just want to use this to get color and roughness variation, I don't need the height because I don't want it to have this rocky kind of height. So I'm going to turn that off. Now if we take a look at the base color, you can see that we're getting some nice color variation, but it might be a little too strong. So by playing with the color variation here, we can actually get it to be a little more subtle. And if we go back to our material, here is where we can start to play with the roughness of our shell as well. So I think something like that feels a little nicer to me. But if we take a look at the roughness, we're actually getting a lot of roughness variation as well, which is more than I would like. So I'm just going to turn down this roughness variation just until we have something nice and subtle. I might even take this a little further up. And I think that's looking pretty good to me. The last thing is, if we look at these black striations, they're coming in vertically. I would like to move them to horizontal because I'm just art directing this, and I can choose how this Pokeball is getting thrown around or where there is discoloration or scratches happening. So if I come to my UV window, you can see that it'll actually show me where my map is and allow me to move it around. So here I can just rotate this holding shift and snap it, and now I have those striations going down the sides. So what I also like to do is I like to come in here and play around with this map until I get it into a good position. And now that we have that, I'm gonna call this my base, and this is gonna be my base layer. I can get rid of the red layer that I was using first, and I'm just gonna duplicate this and bring this into my white shell as well. And I'm gonna use this as the white base as well. So I can just change the color to something a little off-white. And I might want to reduce the color variation because again, this is on the white, it's really gonna show. And the roughness, I can leave it to be the same. I can move this around as well. So now you can see that I have a very quick layered in roughness variation and color variation going on. And now I'm ready to move forward. So the next thing I might want to add is some grunge or some grime, especially because I'm picturing that this Pokeball has probably been thrown around a lot, and whenever it hits a surface or it hits the ground, it's going to leave marks and it's going to leave some kind of discoloration on the Pokeball itself. And to achieve this, I'm going to use what in my opinion is the holy grail of texturing in Substance Painter, which is using a fill layer, attaching a black mask to it, and attaching a fill layer to that black mask. What this allows us to do is, if we come up here to our textures, we can find all these really cool black and white maps. And if I drag these into my fill layer, you can see that I'm now able to use that texture as my mask. So I'm gonna look for something like this grunge wipe, and let's try putting it in and seeing the result we can get. So I'm gonna use this map to get a general kind of discoloration going on here. So I'm gonna tweak this map to get an interesting pattern. And then we're gonna move on. So let's say I like that. Now I'm gonna give this a darker color. Okay, something like that. And just to integrate it a little bit more into the surface, I can turn down the transparency or the opacity of the layer to make it blend a little more with the layer underneath. And I'm gonna call this grunge. Okay, now we've got some cool scratched pattern on the top. Let's try to do the same thing on the bottom white as well. So I'm just gonna paste that there, and we're gonna move it down. Try to get a little bit of that scratching down here as well. Okay, And I think I quite like that. So we have some grunge in the top and we have some grunge at the bottom as well. The next thing I want to add is a little bit of edge wear. So if we're thinking that this Pokeball is getting thrown around a lot of times when objects come into contact with something else, they tend to lose paint, or the paint starts to chip away because of being rubbed against other surfaces. So this is the next thing we're going to try to achieve. And for that, I'm going to create a layer, but this time this fill layer is going to be above these two folders because I want this to affect everything that's underneath it. And I'm going to do the same thing. So add a black mask, and I'm going to add a generator to that black mask. And if I click here, I can find the metal edge wear. Let's select it and see what we get. And these generators are basically using the maps that we baked right in the start to understand our model and understand where this metal edge wear would be situated, right? And that's why I think generators are really awesome. They give you a very quick and procedural way to texture your assets. So right here, again, I'm just playing around with the properties, seeing if I can get something interesting. And if I go to the main layer, because I'm using a mask, I am using this generator to drive the mask, but I'm still using the main layer to control the attributes of that information. So say for example, I'm thinking that that the Pokeball is metal underneath and it has a coat of paint on top, right? So whenever the edge wears off, I should be able to see the metal underneath. So this surface right here, we can go ahead and add some color to it first. And then I'm going to turn on metalness and take this all the way that side. I can also choose how rough I want this metal to be. In this case, I'm going to keep it pretty shiny. Okay, and now that I've added my edge wear, I would like to add some scratches as well in the same fashion. And for that, what I might do is just take the same grunge map that I'm using and I'm going to paste it up here. And I'm going to tweak some of the layer attributes to first get it where I want, and second, let's make this metal as well, because I want these scratches to look like the surface is being scratched when the Pokeball is thrown, and we're starting to see that metal underneath, right? Okay, and now I have some pretty cool looking scratches, and we can see that wherever this mask is working, underneath that mask I can see the metal showing through, which I quite like as an effect. So again, you can pretty much spend countless hours playing with the position of these maps and just trying to move them around to get exactly what you want. But for the sake of moving along today, let's go ahead and wrap up this texturing process. So here I'm pretty much done with some scratches on the top. We're gonna call this scratches. And you might ask, what if I don't want this detail to be everywhere? What if I want to take away this detail from some areas? Yes, that is totally possible. All you need to do is add a paint layer to your black mask, and now you can actually go in, and when you make your grayscale black, you can paint away any kind of details from that mask. So let's say we don't want it in certain places, you can just go very quickly and just get rid of it. Okay, and now I quite like this effect on the top, so I might want to mimic it at the bottom as well. So I'm just going to take this, let's duplicate it once more, and this time I'm just going to move it downward, move it this side actually. Okay, and this time I'm gonna add a paint layer and I'm gonna paint away the top, or I can just take my polygon fill, I can switch this to black and I can deselect the top. And now I have some nice scratch marks at the bottom and I have them at the top as well. And with this, the texturing for the outer shell is pretty much done. The next thing I need to do is texture this metal. And for that, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to call this base and turn on metalness, make that metal. Let's give it a base roughness and change the color. And for the inner shell, actually, I might take a look at the materials. And I think having the inner shell be carbon fiber would be pretty cool. You can fight me on this if you're a Pokemon fan, but I think we could get a pretty cool looking result from this. So I just dragged and dropped the carbon fiber material, and I'm gonna go to the material properties, see if I can play with the colors a little bit just to get some color variation. And if I scroll up here, I can move the tiling as well to reduce the scale of that carbon fiber detail. Maybe I'll push the roughness as well. Okay, and that's looking pretty good to me. The last thing I want to do is actually add a human element to this Pokeball. If it is being used a lot or it's being thrown around a lot, it's definitely going to have some fingerprints or some smudges on it. And for that, I can add a fill layer, again, black mask, and a fill layer to that black mask. And I can look in the textures for something like fingerprints. So I do like this one. Let's add it and see what kind of effect we're getting. So if we look at the mask, the place where the fingerprint should be actually looks a little darker, but I want the mask to be inverted because that's where I want my control to be. So I can just come here to the parameters and flip this mask. Let's now play with the balance, and now all we gotta do to make this actually look like fingerprints is come to our main layer, turn off everything else but roughness, and turn this roughness down. And what you'll start to see is that we're now going to get this varied roughness, which is going to feel and look like fingerprints. So if we take a look at this a little closer, when the light hits it at certain angles, you're gonna see a lot of this reflection. Okay, and if you want, you can make it stronger as well, but that's just gonna bring down the value of everything. So I think leaving it as it was is a better option. And if you really want, you can even start to layer multiple of these together. Like we have one layer here. I could just duplicate this layer, and I could do another one of maybe some more fingerprints, and just drag and drop that here. Play with the roughness a little bit, and now I have some even more hotspots on the Pokeball. And that's pretty much it for the texturing process. So thanks for sticking around until the end and watching me texture this Pokeball. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts or questions in the comments. And if you do decide to model a Pokeball of your own, I'd love to see your progress. So share your work and tag me on Instagram at mesh_labs. Also, if you would like to see more in-depth Substance Painter content, let me know in the comments. See you in the next one.